This is Dorie Clark, and we are here with the weekly Newsweek interview series Better, where we talk to smart and talented people about how you can improve your business and your life. Today, we're here with Jon Levy. He is the author of the new book, You're Invited, and we're going to be talking about how to cultivate influence. Jon, it's great to have you here.
Dorie, I'll show up literally anywhere to hang out with you. So thank you for having me on.
Amazing. Well, thank you. So, Jon, I want to start out. You have some of the most memorable back flap book copy that I have come across. I just want to read this verbatim because, frankly, it made me laugh out loud. Behavioral scientist Jon Levy had no money, reputation, or status, but was able to convince groups of Nobel laureates, Olympians, celebrities, Fortune 500 executives, and even an occasional princess to not only give him advice, but cook him dinner, wash his dishes, sweep his floors, and then thank him for the experience. I love that. I think it makes you sound possibly a little more lame than you are, Jon, because you're actually a pretty cool guy. But I love that description. So give us a sense here. How did you get started in this quest? Why did you get started? And what form did it take, my man?
Well, the first thing was when I was in my late 20s, I was the stereotype of like not living up to my potential, whatever that means. I was broke, overweight, kind of lonely. And I had come across this crazy study by Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler. They were curious about the obesity epidemic. And they were curious, does it spread from person to person like a cold? Or is it a percentage of the population like Alzheimer's? You don't get Alzheimer's from hanging out with people who have Alzheimer's, to the best of our knowledge. And what they found was startling, that if you have a friend who's obese, your chances increase by 45%. Your friends who don't know them have a 20% increased chance, and their friends have a 5% increased chance. And that's true for happiness, marriage and divorce rates, smoking habits, voting habits. So I realized if I really want to impact my life, rather than beating myself up for not being able to accomplish all the things I want to, maybe it was about surrounding myself with the type of people who I really admire and respect. And so I kind of got obsessed with this idea of how do I not only connect with people, but build a community, bring them together so they can positively impact each other. And I ended up launching this crazy dinner. 12 people are invited. They're not allowed to talk about what they do or give their last name. They cook dinner together. And when they sit down to eat, they play a guessing game and they find out that they're sitting with all these fancy people, Nobel laureates, Olympians, celebrities, Grammy Award winners, and even the voice of the dog from Who Let the Dogs Out, which is kind of funny. It's an actual.
You can't beat that. Yeah.
So that's kind of the backstory. And I've hosted over 227 dinners in 10 cities in 3 countries and hosted thousands of guests. And it's really been a privilege and to get to know them.
That's amazing, Jon. Thank you so much. And I just want to say hi to some of the great folks who are tuning in. Please feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you are dialing in from. We have Kimberly here. We have Karen from Boston. We have Cheryl from Minneapolis. We have David from Indianapolis. We have Harsha from London and many more. So welcome. And please feel free to type your questions for Jon Levy into the chat box. He's the author of the new book, the New York Times bestseller, You're Invited, The Art and Science of Cultivating Influence. So, Jon, one of the themes that I want to push on that you were alluding to is that in these dinners of well-known people, celebrities that you have put together, the Olympians, the business people, the entertainers, you focus on anonymity. That seems to be an important part of the experience. Why did you decide that needed to be a cornerstone? What does that accomplish, and how does that lend itself to group cohesion?
So I think it's really great that you notice that. The beauty of anonymity is that, especially in a culture like New York, where I got started, everybody's all about their status. But if we want to really create deeper and more meaningful relationships with people, we want to take the hierarchy out. And so the first thing we did was we said, okay, everybody's now on an even playing field. You don't get to talk about your resume. You don't get to have your stump speech that you've said 1,000 times. You're going to have the kinds of conversations that you have with your best friends, right? You're going to talk about things like your vacations and what your kids are up to and your hobbies and what you're really excited about. And then we did an additional thing, which is there's this really weird quirk of human behavior called the Ikea Effect. And the Ikea Effect says that we disproportionately care about our Ikea furniture because we had to assemble it. Turns out anything we put effort into, we care about more. And so not only did we have anonymity to even the playing field, we then have the guests cook together so that they invest effort into one another and their relationship. And as a byproduct, they end up bonding really deeply and talking about the things that really matter to them.
I think that's a really interesting point. And having attended some of your salons, which is another sort of variation of the events that you run, I can say that it's a very cool experience. Now, one of the big things, of course, that's impacted all of us, Jon, over the past 18 months has been COVID. I know that during COVID, hosting dinner parties of strangers, probably not the thing
Not
to
a good
do.
idea. No.
So I know that you, like a lot of people, pivoted to virtual during that time. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how were you able to continue forming a cohesive community of people virtually? What did that transition look like for you in terms of cultivating and curating the events?
So it's interesting. I really had to do two things. One is community and giving people a sense of belonging comes from consistency. So we knew we had to do something, especially with people feeling so lonely and isolated. But what we kept seeing was that companies would take their in-person experiences and put them online, and they'd just be terrible, right? You'd be sitting at the back end of an 800-person WebEx, seeing some third-rate recording of a concert, wondering why you're just not watching it on YouTube or the Tiger King, because that was around at the beginning of COVID. So we really started unpacking and looking at the behaviors that occur in person that we tend not to do online. And what we found is that there's kind of three things that are intrinsic about in-person experiences. The first is that we expect to be entertained and enlightened. You go to a concert, you go hear a talk, right? You get some information or you're entertained by the experience. The second, though, is there's a fundamental characteristic of being around people and the potential for connection. So when you listen to a concert on Spotify and you go in person, the experience is completely different because you have the potential for connection or just being around the energy of other people. And the third is that we have a need for influence. And what I mean by that is not like just posting on social media, but when you're at a concert or a game or something, you can scream, you can shout, you can dance. You have an impact on the environment around you. And when you're on the tail end of a WebEx, it doesn't really feel that way. So what we decided to do was we started hosting events digitally, but we wanted to switch the focus from me, the presenter, to the people who are participants. And so people would come on and we'd immediately send them into small 6-person breakout rooms so that they can make new friends, so that they can get a sense of connection and influence. And we also gave them prompts so that it would catalyze conversation so it wouldn't feel as awkward. And then we did kind of fun things. We'd have 2 talks and people can ask questions and interrupt and all that. We'd have about 150 people on. And then we'd have a game show where we split people up into teams to compete. And games on digital platforms are phenomenal because they bond people quickly and they create a sense of belonging within the groups. So it was, people were staying on sometimes 4 or 5 hours. And like we were averaging at one point, I think 2, almost 3 Nobel laureates per event, which is crazy.
That's incredible, and especially because your events start a little later. I think they're typically on West Coast time, so people are very committed. I saw with my own eyes. Even people in the East Coast were sometimes staying
up to like 2 or
past.
3. It was crazy.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, speaking of great people and great participants, we want to say hi to some of the people who are tuning into our conversation with New York Times bestselling author Jon Levy. His book is You're Invited: The Art and Science of Cultivating Influence. And so we wanted to say hi to, we have a LinkedIn user from Maine. We have Zita from Newbury, England. We have Kimberly from Charleston. We have Kristen from Dallas, Marion from Atlanta. We have Krishna Priya from Toronto. We have Arsalan from Kurdistan, Iraq. Hello.
Wow.
We've got Catherine from Atlanta and Michael from Hudson Square, New York. We're so glad to have all of you here and more. And please feel free to type your questions for Jon into the chat box. If you're interested in learning more about Jon Levy and his work, you can go to his website. It's jonlevytlb.com, and his book is You're Invited. If you want to make sure you never miss one of our weekly Newsweek interview series, go to my website, dorieclark.com. You can sign up, get a free self-assessment. You'll be added to our email list where you get regular reminders about our fantastic guests. So, Jon, one question that I had for you, I'm curious. The subtitle, of course, of your new book is The Art and Science of Creating Influence. And I'm curious, how does building community connect with influence? What links those two pieces, and how do you do that more effectively?
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay. So I think the first thing we want to understand is that most of the things that we care to influence, which means the ability to have an impact on a person or an outcome, aren't what most people associate the word influence to. Usually we think of like Instagram or a large following on LinkedIn or something like that. But the kind of influence that most of us care about are having our boss see our ideas and take them seriously, or getting a client to appreciate the work that we've done, or getting our kids to eat a healthy meal. That kind of influence actually doesn't require a large social media following. That kind of influence is defined by three characteristics, I would argue. One is who we're connected to, because if we're not connected to somebody, it's really hard to influence them. It's possible, but it's just really hard. The second is how much they trust us, because if I don't trust you, I'm not going to opt in to be influenced by you. And the third is the sense of community that we share. And here's why. You'll notice that the closer you are with people, and the more they're connected to each other, the greater impact you have on one another. Just like in the study I discussed at the beginning of the interview about the spread of ideas in communities. If you have a project you want to promote, or you're trying to get the attention of specific people, the number of contacts and how connected they are has a huge impact on that. Fundamentally, for human beings, community and belonging are the reason that we survived. We are not the fastest or the strongest animals out there, but what we are is better at working with each other. And that really defines our influence to a large degree.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Jon. And a great question came in from Krishna Priya, who wondered, hey, Jon Levy, amazing stuff. And it is. Krishna Priya wants to know, people in power are often afraid of being used or abused, or that their status or contact information would be used to gain favors later. So when you are organizing your dinner gatherings, of course, at first, people's identity is anonymous. But what happens afterwards? You discover that you've been having dinner with an Olympic athlete or a famous musician or what have you. How do you actually keep this issue from happening? How are you able to overcome the barrier of perhaps celebrity or famous people worrying that folks might want to lean on them inappropriately after the fact?
So I think that there's two important characteristics here. One is that when you've developed a relationship based on trust, and by cooking together or doing some kind of activity, it could be anything from working out together to taking an art class or doing a hike or something like that, then these things end up increasing the level of trust between you and, let's call them the celebrity, the business person, whatever it is. And as a byproduct, when that context is really trusted, then there's less of a concern that there's going to be some abuse. The second element is that overwhelmingly, most of the relationships that come from this have no business opportunity. So if someone's an Olympian and the other one is an astronomer, there's no business opportunity there. You're becoming friends to be friends. So it really allows for a community to foster. And as a byproduct, that base level of trust reduces the concern that anybody's going to be taken advantage of. I'd also like to add one additional thing, which is that even though we talk about trust a lot, most of us don't really understand what it's made of. And I didn't understand this till I was doing research for my book and came across something called the Trust Project. And at Kellogg, and led by this brilliant researcher. And what became clear is trust is made of three things. It's made out of competence, your ability to do something; honesty, that you're truthful; and the third is benevolence, that you have other people's best interests at heart. Now, what's interesting is that they're not all equally valued. If you are, if let's say your coworker comes in and has a great reputation, but does a terrible presentation one day, you wouldn't say, oh, they're incompetent, we can't trust them. You'd say, oh, they had a bad day. But if a different coworker you found out lied to you, you would probably begin to doubt everything that they have said and everything that they say moving forward. So you can see we value honesty higher than we value competence. Now, here's a weird loophole. Dorie, imagine the two of us are walking down the street, okay? And you say, John, hey, do you mind if I go pick something up from a friend's house real quick? It'll just be a quick stop. And I'm like, sure, no problem. When we get there, they open the door and 40 of my closest friends jump out and scream, surprise! Now, I want you to notice, Dorie, you just lied to me, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, but it would be really weird if I turned to you and said, Dorie, you just lied to me. We can't be friends anymore. And why is that?
It does seem unlikely. I suppose it would be because the lie was intended to have a beneficial outcome for you.
Exactly. So you can see we value benevolence, that you have other people's best interests at heart, above honesty, and honesty above competence. Now, in most of our culture, we lead with competence. Our servers are up 99.999% of the time. And that's fine. It's important to demonstrate competence. But if we lead with benevolence, something like, Dorie, I know you have awesome resources for people on your website. And that's where you really get to show the world all the incredible work that you do. We're not going to let anything happen to your site. We're going to host it, and it's going to be on our most secure servers, because I know how important it is for people to have access to all the knowledge and resources that you possess. You can count on us for that. Now, you'll notice that one was leading with benevolence and the other one was leading with competence. And so as a byproduct, my hunch is that you'd feel more comfortable when people lead with benevolence.
Yes, good pitch, John. That's a great tip. I love that.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
Just to finish that thought. So at the dinners, what we really look for is, how do we build relationships that lead with benevolence? And by building trust without status, we're really able to do that in a kind of unique way. That way, people feel safer in general with each other than they would if they met at like some networking event or something.
Yeah, that's a really useful point. Thank you for that distinction. And I wanted to turn to a related but slightly different issue. Harsha from London chimed in, and he was curious, is it possible to apply John's approach to the job search process, or assisting your career progression while you're employed? How does all this factor into to one's career or job search?
Oh, I think it applies perfectly. I think it was even a LinkedIn study that found that most people get their jobs through loose ties, people that they kind of know. And the fact is that the more people you're connected with that are, let's say, that are in positions to support you, the better situation you'll be in. So the question becomes then, okay, let's say I know somebody slightly, how do I get them to maybe like or trust me more, or want to get involved and support me? And this is a really kind of funny quirk that I call stacking. And it works like this. Dorie, if I stop you on the street and ask for directions and I'm a complete stranger, you're a nice person, so you'll probably give them to me, but most people won't. Like, it's just a thing, right? Especially if they're complicated. But if I first ask you for the time and then ask you for the directions, you will. And that's really weird, because I've asked for more in total, and yet you were willing to give it to me. And this is a well-known study that was done. And the reason is that once somebody puts a little bit of effort into our relationships, then we are viewed as somebody worthy of effort, and thereby they're willing to put in more. So as we're looking for jobs or looking to connect in business, one of my recommendations is, obviously, if we want to be trusted, lead with benevolence, and make sure that there's reciprocity in everything that we do, so that there isn't this feeling of that we're just takers. But if I wanted, let's say I didn't know Dorie and I wanted to develop a relationship, I'd probably start off with something really small, like, "Hi Dorie, and send you a message that says, 'Hi Dorie, I've read your books. I love them. I've been watching your show on LinkedIn, and I love it. One thing I haven't seen the answer to is this, or is if I were to only read like 2 books this summer besides yours, which ones would they be?'" And so it's a really quick answer that's a minimal amount of effort. And then once I get that advice and I fulfill on it, I would come back and say, "Oh my God, that was so helpful." And then I'd ask for something just slightly bigger. That way, I get these continual feedback loops of effort, and then I offer support as well. And so I think that kind of stuff tends to work really well.
Yeah, I love that. It's a super practical tip, Jon. I've noticed just to build on that. Maybe you have as well. My personal life hack on the streets of New York City, where we're kind of constantly accosted by people, is that whenever anyone comes up to you and says, "Can I ask you a question?" I have learned to actually say no and blitz past them. And the reason I do that is that if someone actually has a legitimate question, like, "Hey, where's the Empire State Building?" or "Hey, what time is it?" they'll just ask it. Whereas if they want to have a pitch, they need to get enrollment beforehand with,
Yes.
"Can I ask you a question?"
Very smart.
Yeah, so I've learned to be like excruciatingly rude, which is painful, but I know where they're going with it.
Yes. I'm so sorry. I'm really busy. I have to go read these tweets on my phone right now that I had in my pocket.
It's an
Yes, very
emergency.
busy.
Absolutely. So we are here with Jon Levy. He is the author of the best-selling book, You're Invited. And if you want to learn more about Jon and his work, go to his website. It's jonlevytlb.com, and you can find out more. And again, if you want to learn more and get plugged in for all of our weekly Newsweek shows, you can follow me on LinkedIn. Just go to dorieclark.com/li and you will get regular updates. So, Jon, a great question came in from Anna. She wants to know, she says, what can organizations and projects do to improve the culture and the way that the culture is influencing people? Now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that you actually have been brought in as a corporate consultant
Yeah.
working with companies on some of these issues. What have you learned in that process, and what can you share with us?
So this is really interesting because things have changed a lot as a byproduct of, let's call it hybrid or remote working. If we want to really have an impact on company culture, it really, first of all, depends on the company. Some cultures thrive in ways that I would never expect. But in general, it's a byproduct of having people have a sense of belonging, right? When you feel safe in the environment and that you're a part of it, then you're going to want to stick around longer and want to invest more effort. In fact, Google did this study called Project Aristotle, where they asked, what is the greatest predictor of team success? And what they found was really interesting. You'd expect it to be like you take a bunch of geniuses, throw them in a room with a bunch of money and figure out a solution to something. But it turns out that that's not the great predictor. It turns out it's something called psychological safety. So psychological safety is the feeling that you can express your opinion, even if it goes against the popular opinion of the group, without any ramifications, like you're not going to be kicked out or shunned or made fun of. And this is critical. And it's critical for a few reasons. One is that we like to talk about how important diversity is, but the benefit of diversity of thinking, the benefit of diversity comes from the thinking and the ideas. So the benefit of, let's say, me being a guy and Dorie being a woman doesn't come from our genders. It comes from Dorie has a different perspective on the world than I do from growing up in a different way. And if there isn't psychological safety in the environment, then we wouldn't benefit from each other's ideas. And that's really where the impact comes in. So it's absolutely key to build higher levels of trust. It's just frankly much, much, much harder at a distance. So companies have to be a lot more intentional. So we have to look at what activities are we having the team work on? How's the communication flowing? Are we micromanaging? Because micromanaging may suggest to people that we don't trust them. So there are all these different factors that we have to take into account.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you for that. Now, a question came in from Marion in Atlanta, and Marion wants to know, Jon, who are your influencers? Who have you learned from that
Oh, wow.
drove your focus on connection? What is sparking and inspiring all this for you? We'd love to hear.
Wow. So it's a lot of researchers. There's a brilliant neuroscientist by the name of Moran Cerf, who's just runs a great lab out of Kellogg. And he did wild stuff. Like he figured out how to project people's thoughts by putting scanners on their brains. And he's been a huge influence on me. There's a famous behavioral scientist by the name of Dan Ariely, who actually discovered the Ikea Effect. He's written a bunch of great books. And I would say, obviously, Dan Kahneman, who's the father of behavioral economics and won the Nobel Prize. And then there's a whole slew of just incredible people that I'm fortunate enough to have as friends. So Julie Gerberding, she was the first female director of the Center for Disease Control and one of the most inspiring and lovely human beings I could ever hope to know. But there's so many I'm going to just lose track, frankly.
Well, that's a really good start. Thank you. Now, Jon, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about your previous book. It's called The 2 a.m. Principle.
Yes.
And this is a book essentially about adventures and how to have more adventures in your life. You apparently have been to all 7 continents. You've run with the bulls in Pamplona.
I
Have
was
done a
crushed
lot
by
of
a
things.
bull.
Crushed by a bull, even.
Almost died.
You
Yeah.
got the full experience, my man.
I wouldn't recommend paying for the full experience. Yes. I paid in years of physical therapy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It turns out that when you're doing running of the bulls, you can make it into the stadium and then they let the bulls out one at a time. I didn't really know that. And then I was kind of just like a fool, as one gets when they're at running of the bulls. And when the bull entered the stadium, it missed its jump in and landed on me. And I got crushed and almost died.
That is extremely unfortunate. I am glad that you were still here. But given that strong endorsement, tell us about the 2 a.m. principle. What is the 2 a.m. principle, and how can we do it without getting killed?
So it's pretty easy to do without getting killed. The 2 a.m. principle is that nothing good happens after 2 a.m. except the most epic experiences of your life. And I've gone out a lot, and 2 a.m. is actually a different time in different cities, depending on when they kind of like shut down.
In Barcelona, it's like 6 a.m.
Yeah, it's like, or in Buenos Aires, it's like 10 a.m. It's just so absurd how late people stay up there. So the basic thing is that everybody I would talk to about living an adventurous life would say, oh yeah, the most adventurous experiences of my life were kind of random. This happened and this happened and so on and so forth. But then I kept noticing that there were certain people who lived very adventurous lives that were wild and fun and super interesting and exciting and had the weirdest stories. And then people who kind of just preferred to stay at home and read and hang out with their pets, and which is totally fine. It's a lovely, lovely experience. But I couldn't accept the idea that it was random. There had to be kind of like a method to the madness, because certain people kept having crazy experiences and certain people didn't. So I spent several years kind of just breaking down the science and found that every adventure follows a predictable 4-stage process. And each stage has specific characteristics that when you apply them, actually makes life exciting. And I want to point out, adventure is lovely because I view it as a catalyst for personal growth. An adventure is an experience that's, 1, exciting and remarkable. It's worth talking about. 2, it possesses adversity and or risk, preferably perceived risk, which is the difference between what happened to me in Pamplona and hopefully the type of adventures that you partake in, Dorie. And 3 is it brings about growth. The person you are at the end is different than the person who started. And that's the beauty for me of an adventure, whether it's traveling to Pamplona and Antarctica or, going out for a wild night with friends in New York or wherever. It's that the experience fundamentally pushes us past some kind of social, physical, or emotional boundary. And as a byproduct, we've grown from it.
I love that. Thank you very much. We have been here with Jon Levy. He's the author of the new book, You're Invited, and the previous book, The 2 a.m. Principle. Again, you can learn more about Jon and his work at his website, jonlevytlb.com. Jon, it's been fantastic having you here.
Dorie, thank you so much for hosting me. I loved it.
Thank you. See everyone next Thursday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and take care.